Welcome to the world of competitive Pokemon. To a newcomer, VGC competitive battles can seem pretty overwhelming, and it's easy to see why. From keeping up with the current gimmick, whether it's no gimmick, Megas, Dynamax, to our current gimmick, Terastallization, learning about IVs and EVs, keeping up with meta-relevant Pokemon, and figuring out what moves and items benefit them most, it can definitely seem like a lot. Which is why I decided to start this series in order to put together a comprehensive guidebook to help guide you on your journey of becoming a competitive battler. Today, we'll start with the basics and go over what exactly happens during competitive battles. At the beginning of each battle, you'll have something called Team Preview. This is where both you and your opponent show your team of 6 Pokemon. One thing to know, however, is that if you are starting this journey during Pokemon Scarlet and Violet, when you go to official tournaments, you will be playing in a best of 3 open team sheet format. This means that during Team Preview, you and your opponent will swap team sheets, which is a physical piece of paper that shows all of your opponent's Pokemon, their moves, their Terra type, their ability, as well as their held item. And of course, yours shows the same. So each of you has all of this information at the tip of your fingers. However, one thing that's not shared on team sheets is how your Pokemon are trained, so there is still a bit of mystery during the matchup. You'll use this open team sheet during Team Preview in order to help you make a decision on which 4 Pokemon you'll bring into battle. As during doubles battles, you do show all 6 of your Pokemon, but you're only allowed to select 4 to bring into the battle. Team Preview is also where you will be able to take the time to come up with a strategy and look at what you want to do during the battle in order to beat your opponent. Look for things like type matchups. Do your Pokemon have an advantage over theirs? Speed matchups. Are your Pokemon faster or slower than theirs? And even things like which of your Pokemon you might want to save Terastallization for. Now that may seem like a lot to think about during Team Preview between the team sheet as well as coming up with a strategy, but this is something that will get easier with time. Me personally, coming from a world of singles battles, this is one of the steps that was hardest for me to get down, as oftentimes I found myself timing out during Team Preview from being indecisive, which is where you run out of time to select your 4 Pokemon. But the more that you practice, the easier it'll get. Now, when it comes to team composition during VGC competitive doubles, there are a couple of things that you need to remember. Number 1 being that you cannot have any repeat Pokemon on your team of 6. So unfortunately, you cannot run 6 Urshifus. You also may not have any repeat items, so no team of 6 Focus Sashes either. Aside from that, you just need to make sure that the Pokemon you're bringing are legal in the current format. And by that, I mean which regulation is currently being used by Pokemon. These regulations do rotate regularly. Currently, in the month of December, we're in Regulation H, which does not allow for any Paradox Pokemon, so no Fluttermanes, and no Legendary Pokemon, regardless of whether they're restricted or not. However, you are allowed to use Pokemon from the Paldea Dex, the Kitakami Dex, as well as the Blueberry Dex. This regulation will update January 1st, however, and you will then be in Regulation G, where you will be allowed to bring legendaries as well as 1 restricted legendary, as well as any Pokemon in all 3 of the Pokedexes. So these regulation changes are something that you will want to pay attention to. That way you can double check to make sure that your Pokemon are legal. But now that you and your opponent have both swapped your team sheets, you've made sure that your team is legal by having no repeat Pokemon, no repeat items, and making sure your Pokemon are able to be used in the current format, it's now time to battle. Like I mentioned, during competitive tournaments, you are going to be in a best of 3 format, which means whichever opponent is the first to reach 2 wins is the winner of the round. This best of 3 format was one of the most beneficial things for me personally when I was learning about competitive doubles. And that's because the best of 3 format gives you time to adjust your strategy. Remember how I mentioned during Team Preview you had a ton of things you wanted to think about when selecting your 4 Pokemon? In a best of 3 format, you have a second and maybe even third chance of doing that. Since each time you rematch your opponent, you have the ability to change the Pokemon that you bring, whether it's the same 4 or you bring the other 2 that sat out for the first battle, or even just changing the order that you send your Pokemon out, basically giving you a second chance in order to improve. So during your battles, you want to take note of things like how much damage their Pokemon do to yours, whose Pokemon are faster, and if your opponent has any Pokemon that may be causing you issues. So even if you didn't make the best decision during your game 1, don't be discouraged because you still have time to adjust and do better the next battle. And you never know, you may just win that round and take it to a game 3. But as you may have noticed, how you train your Pokemon is just as important as which Pokemon you actually bring. One of the things that you may hear from more casual players is that oftentimes they think that competitive battling is boring because people only bring what they call meta Pokemon, and everyone runs the same teams. Now, meta Pokemon are usually the most popular Pokemon during the format, which are usually Pokemon that are very versatile and are able to be used in a variety of situations and on a variety of teams. In other words, they're consistent, and they're popular for a reason. Take Incineroar, for example. But like I mentioned previously, you want to pay attention to the interactions between your team and their team, because even though you and your opponent may be running the exact same team, you probably didn't train them the exact same way, which is something that I find very interesting about VGC battles, because even though you may find yourself in what they call a mirror match, the way you train your Pokemon may just make the difference between you winning or losing the battle. And the way you train your Pokemon comes down to their IVs and EVs. But that's a topic for a different day. So to recap everything that we've gone over today, during VGC competitive doubles, at least during the Scarlet and Violet era, when you're at an official tournament, you will show a team of 6 Pokemon, however you will only be allowed to select 4 for the battle. You will be playing in an open team sheet format, which means that you and your opponent will swap team sheets at the beginning of the battle, and you'll be able to see all of their Pokemon's moves, their item, their Terra type, and their ability. You'll be in a best of 3 format, which means that whichever of you wins 2 battles wins the round, and you will only be able to use Pokemon that are legal in the current regulation. Now in the next video, we'll go over how you train your Pokemon may just make or break a battle for you. But until then, hopefully this gives you a glimpse of what it's like to battle in a competitive tournament. Leave a comment down below if you have any specific topics that you'd like me to cover in the future, and let me know if you like this style of video. But that's gonna go ahead and wrap it up for this episode of the series. Hopefully you guys found it helpful, and if you did, I kindly suggest that you consider subscribing so that I can continue to make content for you guys. And if you were already subscribed and you would like another way to support the channel, feel free to check out the merch store. There is a link down below in the description that takes you to not only my merch store, but also all of my other socials so you can keep up with what I'm doing on a daily basis. But thank you all so much for watching, and thank you to those of you who have joined the channel as members. I appreciate you all so much. I love you guys, and I will see you in the next video. Bye guys.